In the last few videos, we talked about the different ways to define variables, and now in this video, I want to talk about type coercion, which is essentially a way of converting one type of information to another type. And if you remember correctly, we have types such as number here, number, we have strings, we have booleans, we have null, and we have undefined. These are essentially the main types that we need to worry about with JavaScript, but how do we convert from one type to another? Let's say we had a string that was like this. It had the number 1. We want to convert this string to a number. How would we go about doing that? Well, there's quite a few handy functions built into JavaScript for us to do that. So let's just go let a equal to 1, and then we're going to console.log a, and we're going to console log the type of a. And if we save, we get 1 being printed out, and it says that it is a type of string. What if we wanted to convert a to a number? All we would need to do is just say parse int. And if you remember the difference between an int and a float, an int is a whole number. So for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, while a float is a decimal. For example, 1.7 or 2.8 or 0.39, whatever. So we say parse int and we pass in the number we want, in our case, a. And now let's just log out what this says. So we'll say console.log parse int of a. And I'll comment out this code down here. Click save. You can see it's going to print out 1. But it's actually printing out the number 1 instead of the string 1. Because if we go type of, you can see it's a type of number. So now we essentially have learned how to convert from a string to a number. This is called explicit type coercion because we're explicitly saying we want to convert this value string to a integer, essentially a number. We're telling the computer we want to go from a string to a number, and we're explicitly telling them with this function. If we had, for example, 1.3 here, and we did parse int and just printed this out, you're going to notice something interesting. It just prints out 1 because it converts this floating point decimal number to a whole number. So we would need to use something called parse float instead. Now if we save, we get 1.3, which is a number. If I do the type of here, it's converting it properly to the decimal representation because this is a floating point number, which essentially just means we have a decimal point. We could also go the other way and convert a number such as 1.34 to a string. To do that, we just need to say a dot to string. So we're calling this function to string on the actual number a. And if we console.log that out and we check inside of here, you can see we get 1.34. And if we check the type of this, it's going to be a string. That's how we convert numbers to strings, for example. And this is something that may be useful if you need to really check the different types of things, converting, for example, the string, 1.34 into a float. That's something that's very common. Or if you need to convert a number into a string, that's another common use case. But there's also something else called implicit type coercion, which just means that the computer is implicitly taking care of this for you. You're not telling it to do the type coercion, it's doing it on its own. And we've actually already seen this before. Let's define a variable a, set it equal to 1, and we're going to define this variable. Let's just use const so we can really practice with this. And this is going to be equal to maybe 2. So these are both strings. And let's actually just make this a little bit easier. It's going to say hello. There we go. So we have the string hello, and we have the number 1. And if we just do a simple console.log where we combine these together with the plus button, so we can say b plus a, and we save, you can see it prints out the string hello 1. And this is a string. But how exactly does that work? Because a is a number, b is a string, and when we add them together, we're getting this interesting thing over here, which is a string combined together of both of them. And this is what happens with implicit type coercion. JavaScript does this all over the place. For example, when you use the plus operation, when you use the equal signs, it's going, or the double equal, sorry. So if you did like equal here, so if this was a string of 1 and this is the number 1, this returns true because it's implicitly converting them to the exact same type to make the comparison of them. Because the string 1 is not the same as the number 1, but JavaScript is converting them both to the same type. So let's just go back here to where we had hello 1. What's happening here is b is of type string, and it's converting this a number to a string. It's the same thing as saying a.toString, and running this, we get the exact same result. So when we have plus with strings and numbers, it always converts the number to a string. But JavaScript is kind of weird. If we were to replace this with a minus, for example, it's going to convert this string to a number. And now when we save, we're getting not a number because hello is not an actual number. We can't convert that to a number. Let's change this to 3, for example. Now we're getting 2 being printed out because it's taking this number, or this string 3, converting it to the number 3, and then subtracting it from our number 1 up here. And if we had plus, instead of giving us 3 plus 1, it's going to give us the string 3 plus the string 1, which is going to result in 31. This is very confusing and something that a lot of people run into. They're like, why am I getting 31 when I'm adding 3 and 1? Well, the problem is that one of these is a string instead of an actual number. So to fix this, all we need to do is convert b to a number. So we'll say parse int of b, and now we're properly getting 4 because we're doing the number 3 plus the number 1. So it's really important when you're working with JavaScript to understand exactly what type all of your variables have. Because if you have strings and numbers and you're mixing them together, you can get weird stuff where it's trying to add together different strings and concatenating them instead of actually adding the numbers together. So it's just important to understand what types your variables hold and to see if you need to swap them between one type to another type. So I just want you to take a little bit of time, kind of experiment with this, create some variables of different types, try adding them, subtracting them, checking if they're equal to each other, and kind of just see what happens with type coercion. It's something you really just kind of have to play around with to understand. But generally, when you're dealing with JavaScript, the best rule of thumb is to try to always make sure your types are exactly the same. That way you don't run into weird bugs related to type coercion. And in the next video, we're actually going to talk about how you can make sure that JavaScript enforces that things are the same type instead of doing this weird type coercion for you. So I can't wait to see you in that next video.